All right, welcome back everybody. If this is your first time in the channel, welcome to Notes to Fret, where we are all about turning theory into riffs. And in this video, we're going to continue our discussion about the Lydian mode. Specifically, this is supplemental part 2 of Lydian, simply because I know that there were a lot of questions about the video that I put out for Lydian. There was some, there was quite a bit in that video that got that got pushed through in a somewhat condensed time frame. So anyways, with that being said, if you're coming into this video and you haven't watched any of the previous videos on Lydian, or you don't have a familiarity with at least intervals and some degree scales, please go back and watch some of those videos again. I know these videos can get a little bit lengthy, so I want to make certain that everybody's using the time to the best of their ability. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump right in. Here, we're looking at our favorite C, Ionian, C major, whatever you want to call it, right? Whole step, half step, whole step, half step. And I just like saying that. So anyways, Lydian, we start from the 4th degree, no problem. Right, so here we are with F Lydian, right? No big, no big revelations here. We start with that whole step after the F, and we get our whole step, half step, whole step, half step, right? So that's Lydian. Now, obviously, we need to take a look at this by way of comparison from C Ionian to C Lydian, and since these are both major scales, we can compare them one for one, and we'll notice that between the 3rd and the 4th degree in the scale, in Ionian, at the top, we have a half step. At the bottom, in Lydian, we have that whole step, which gives us that raised 4th, right? That's what we all say about Lydian, raised 4th. So this should pretty much be review for everybody. Again, if this is confusing to you, please take a step back and look at some of the other videos on Lydian. But with that being said, one of the things that I think has some people a little bit confused on my teaching on all of this when we talk about scales. If we're looking at C Ionian, we'll constantly see where I have graphics where we go from the 1st degree to the octave, right? And then from there, I just kind of circle back around, right? So if I'm talking about the B major chord or B diminished chord or B minor, it doesn't matter. I kind of loop back around, and there's this kind of double visual of C. But realistically, if we think about it, right, most of you probably get this, but we can carry this out horizontally n number of times, right? So if we want to go up 12 octaves, we do this 12 different times, right? So here you can see that the whole step, half step, whole step, half step, it continuously repeats, right? It just keeps on going. So rather than drawing this all the way out, vertically across the entire screen or horizontally across the entire screen, going from C for the 1st octave, from C to the 2nd octave, from C to the 3rd octave, so on and so forth. I'm just, from this whole step, you look at that, right? From C to D, it's a whole step. So wanted to kind of put that out there because I do think that a couple of people are asking about this. But again, that's why I come back, and that's why I do, kind of loop back around for that. So anyways, with that being said, let's go ahead and jump in. And here we are. We're looking at the Ionian mode at the top and the Lydian mode down at the bottom. And we obviously see that we have our raised 4th, right? Our F sharp, no problem. And the other chord that I kept harping about in the Lydian video was this B. I kept on going on and on and on and on about B. Well, we know that in B Ionian, B is diminished, right? That's a diminished chord. So the natural question arises, what does that do to the B in Lydian? They're both major scales. So what happens there, right? And, kind of common sense says, well, that should be a diminished chord as well. But we know it's not. Instead, really what wound up happening was we got this F sharp diminished. And if we're looking at this, you may be thinking, well, how did we go from the B diminished to B minor, and now I've got an F to F sharp diminished, right? These are the, we already spoke about the D in the previous video, but if we're looking at F to F sharp diminished and B diminished to B minor, like how does that really correlate to what we're looking at, and how does that really happen? Now, the thing about diminished chords, there's a few points that I want to bring up. A diminished chord, we're talking about triads here, right? And triad just means there's 3 notes in the chord, right? A first, a third, and a fifth. Are there other derivatives of chords? Absolutely. And we'll get into all of them. But for now, we're just talking about triads, the first, the third, and the fifth. So a diminished chord is a minor third and a diminished fifth, right? We've looked at this in previous videos when we walked through the fretboard and looked at to see what a minor third was and a diminished fifth, right? So additionally, a diminished chord doesn't sound good. If you just strum out a diminished chord, it's just going to sound, well, it's not going to be easy on the ears, right? So diminished chords can be difficult to use, and they're not used very frequently, right? So it's really something that rarely happens in today's music, but when it is used, oftentimes it may be used as what they call passing chord, right? So if I'm going from a stable chord to another stable chord and I'm, soloing over something, I may, for one beat, bring in a diminished, either, part of the note for making up that diminished chord, or I may hit over a diminished chord, but it's very rare. It's not every time I go from 2 stable chords, I always put in a diminished. That's not it at all. Diminished chords are really, really difficult to use. So, and they're not used very often. So just keep that in mind, because this is going to become relevant later. Now, the only thing I want to do is I want to take a real quick peek to understand a minor chord versus a diminished chord. Both a diminished as well as a minor chord both have minor thirds. However, the diminished chord will have a diminished fifth, whereas the minor chord will have a perfect fifth. Okay, now keep that in mind. Both a minor chord as well as a diminished chord, they both have minor thirds. The only difference when we're talking about triads is a diminished chord will have a diminished fifth and a minor chord will have a perfect fifth. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, here, what we're looking at is we're now going to do a comparison of Ionian and Lydian, specifically looking at the F sharp and the B. However, we are using context here, so we are not going to use the term tritone at all. Okay? So, bye-bye tritone. We clearly want to understand what the impact of this raised fourth really means for Lydian. Okay? So, let's take a look at Lydian. And the first thing I want to do is take note of this F sharp, right? I'm just going to move the 4 above the F and the F sharp. We know which chord or which degree we're talking about. We're talking about the 4th, right? So here, when we're talking about the F sharp, we really need to pay attention to the 1st, the 3rd, and the 5th, right? That's how we make up a triad chord. So keeping that in mind, what I want to do is take a look, F sharp to G. F sharp to G is a half step or 1 fret. Okay, like whatever, but it's also important to know that that's the major difference between Ionian and Lydian, right? So in Ionian, between F to G is a whole step, and F sharp to G is a half step. Mildly interesting about the second. I'm not really worried about that right now. But that second to the third, G to A, is a whole step. And what that gives us is 3 frets from F sharp to A. And we know that when we move 3 frets, we have a minor third. Therefore, A is a minor third of F sharp. Okay? Now, however, when you look at F to A in the Ionian mode, that is a major third, right? There's 4 frets from F to A, whereas there's only 3 frets from F sharp to A that we have in Lydian. Okay, so keep that in mind. In Lydian, if we're talking about F sharp, so far we have a minor third. In Ionian, when we talk about F, we have a major third. Just kind of put that in the back of your mind. Next, we need to see what happens from the third to the fourth, from A to B, and that's a whole step. No change there. And then we talk about what happens from B to C. Well, that's a half step, right? 1 fret. So between A to C, there's only 3 additional frets. So when we move up 3 frets, what do we get when we're talking about our fifth? We get a diminished fifth. And what did we say about a minor third and a diminished fifth? It gives us that diminished chord because we've moved that perfect fifth back 1 fret, okay? And so therefore, we have an F sharp diminished. So now when we're looking at Ionian and Lydian, right, we have these two, kind of comparisons. Why did I harp on this so much? What's the big deal? Who cares? Whatever. Why did I, in the original video, go on and on about this diminished? Like I said, diminished chords are very difficult to use, and they're not used very frequently. So therefore, in C Ionian, in C major, if we had a 1-4-5 chord progression, which is a C, an F, and a G, it's going to sound really good. And that's a whole lot of majors, so it's going to really sound like upbeat. But essentially, down in Lydian, for all intents and purposes, we've negated our ability to use that 4th chord, right? It's, for all intents and purposes, it's really brought out of our, kind of common spectrum. So, I spoke about in the intervals video that the 3rd interval is the most important to know. No question about it. Know the 3rd interval. The 5th is probably the 2nd most important. And probably followed by that is the octave and the unison, right? Unison, quasi-interesting, but, most of us know the octave, and that's an important one. Followed by that is the 4th. It matters, especially when we start talking about suspended chords and a bunch of other stuff, which we'll get into later. But taking out the 4th means something. That has impact on our music. And for all intents and purposes, making that F sharp diminished kind of makes us lose that fourth degree of our scale. So that's why it's so incredibly interesting with Lydian, right? Because you kind of lose that 4th, which is a very important interval. So with that being said, let's go ahead now and jump in and talk about the B, which was another thing I, never shut up about on the original video. So in Ionian, we have B diminished. Okay. That means in C Ionian, B, our 7th degree, really is kind of unusable for all intents and purposes. We can use it, but let's just say for the time being we can't use diminished, just for the sake of argument. Well, the 7th it's interesting, and it's an important interval. There's no question about it. And we'll talk more about it when we talk more about some of our advanced chords. But it's in there, okay. But in Lydian, it's this minor. Well, minors are very easy to use, right? But one of the things that we need to pay attention to when we're talking about scales is the distance that we have between our tonic, in this case C, and whichever note we're talking about, in this case B. B is the 7th degree of C Lydian or C Ionian. And between the tonic, which is C, which is the 1st degree, all the way out to the 7th, which is B, that's a long distance, right? There's a long distance there. So, the further away we get from our home tonic, in this case C, lot of stuff can kind of happen in there, right? That's how you build up tension in a song. Dun, 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 boom. And then you kind of come back home, right? That's kind of my best vocal for bringing it back home, right? But anyways, with that seventh being way out there, if now that we can use it as a minor, we get some funkiness with it. So we're in this major mode, Lydian, and then all of a sudden, way out away from our tonic, we have our seventh degree, which is minor, which we're free to use now very easily. And that's what gives us this weird dreamy feeling with Lydian. It's this minor that's way out there, right? So that's why I kept harping on it, because this is the reason that Lydian gives you that dreamy feel, because this seventh degree becomes minor. But let's take a look, and let's not take my word for it that we changed from diminished to minor. Let's evaluate it, right? So here with B, once again, we're going to be looking at our first, our third, and our fifth, because that's how we put things together. Now, the one thing I do want to bring up is when we're going from B to, looking at the chord, we obviously have this F sharp diminished thing in there. Well, the diminished, that's not a note, that's a chord, right? And we're evaluating the B minor based off all the notes in the chord. So the F sharp diminished chord doesn't really play a factor. The F sharp note does. So I'm going to go ahead and take that diminished away, because we're paying attention to notes right now to construct the B minor chord, okay? So from B to C, we have a half step. And that's identical to what we have in Ionian, so no big deal there. Then we have C to D, which is another whole step, 2 more frets, which is identical to Ionian. So again, whatever. But we need to pay attention that B to D is 3 frets, so it gives us our minor third, okay? Now, that's identical to Ionian. The next thing from D to E is a whole step, and E to F sharp is a whole step. Right, and that's definitely different than what we have in Ionian, right? So now we have these 2 whole steps between D to E is a whole step and E to F sharp is another whole step. And so therefore, right, that's 4 more frets we had to move up. So therefore, that brings us to our perfect fifth, whereas in Ionian, from D to E was a whole step, that's fine, but E to F was only a half step. So that would have brought us down 1 fret into our 6th, which gives us our diminished. Okay, so again, this is where, those diminished chords really start to transition, right? In one sense, F sharp diminished kind of takes that 4th degree away from us, right? We can't really use that F sharp so freely anymore. But, and it gives us, the Lydian does, it gives us that 7th degree as a minor, and it transitioned that minor from a diminished, right? The diminished used to be off limits to us. The 7th was off limits. Now, we're free to use it. Good to go, right? So this was kind of what I was, trying to get to in that original Lydian video, where these diminished chords kind of getting transitioned and moved around really impact the sound of the particular mode. So anyways, with that being said, I've got one more supplemental for Lydian to come out, kind of the usage of it when I was comparing C major to G major. So I'll come out with that one in the next couple days to make certain that we're clear on everything. And then after I get out that third supplemental, we'll move into the Mixolydian mode. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and close out this video here. Looking forward to seeing you in the next one. And let me know if you have any questions down in the comments. All right. Take care, everybody.